Good afternoon, everybody. Topic given to me is overview of Bombay Sales Tax Act, overview of Maharashtra Value Added Tax Act, and overview of Sale and Purchase Tax Act as well as the Profession Tax Act. Topic is too lengthy. I have started to just touch to the basic facets and principles of the law. There are very stalwarts sitting in the room. Therefore, I will minimize my presentation to the only relevance of the act. First, this PowerPoint presentation F5. Presentation plan will include the overview of all these four acts. Specifically the Bombay Sales Tax Act, Maharashtra Value Added Tax Act, Professions Tax Act, and Sugarcane Purchase Tax Act. Next, since the Bombay Sales Tax Act has been repealed in 2005, its relevance is only pertaining to the periods which are prior to the 31st March 2005 and the cases which would be pending before the tribunal. Therefore, I have just touch to the very basics of it, and as we all know, this as the GST has subsumed so many taxes under the per se types of taxes under the GST law, as like this October 1959 GST Act has subsumed so many laws which were prevailing at that point of time. The famous of which is the CP and Berar Act, etc. The source of power, as we know, is the entry 54, unamended entry 54, which were empowering the state to levy the tax on the sales and as well as the purchases. The incidence of tax, so far as the Bombay Sales Tax Act is concerned, it was the first point single stage tax. What does it mean? It allows you to levy the tax only in respect of the first stage, that too only one time. And what were their stages? The stages were manufacturer and importer. If any dealer who has manufactured the goods into the state of Maharashtra and who subsequently sells it, then that point of time, the tax was levied. If the goods are imported into the state of Maharashtra, either it is an import from outside the country or outside the Maharashtra state, that is within country, the tax was levied. Therefore, it was the first stage single point tax as always. There were certain exceptions. The reselling certain contingency. Resell means selling goods as it is without doing anything to those goods. The resell is made. I presume certain terminology are well acquainted. Therefore, I will not explain those because I have to finish it within 1 hour. Resell, there were certain exceptions when the goods are sold, which are resold, and if the seller is holder of a trademark, or if he holds a patent, or if he holds the trademark patent in respect of the manufacturing process, then in those respects, the tax was levied and resale was disallowed. What does it mean? It means that the tax was levied on the value addition. We can say in certain context, so far as the goods holding the trademark or the patent or the process patents are concerned, they are a value added tax. That is, to that respect, it is a value added tax. Whatever taxes are paid on the earlier stage, they were refunded. Suppose Hasmukh Rai and Company, a tea, there is a trademark of Hasmukh Rai and Company, and the tea is purchased from a registered dealer who was not holding a registered trademark. Seller holds the registered trademark. He does only the packing. Nothing is being done. And if such tea is sold, then earlier tax, whatever earlier stage, whatever taxes are paid, they were available as a set off. And on the subsequent stage, on the only value addition, the taxes were paid. Then this was resulted as a issuance of the DDQ by the Honorable Commissioner that if a seller holds a trademark or holds a process patent or holds a trademark, and if he makes the resale of the goods, then that resale will be disallowed. This led to a situation where the tribunal was required to decide what is the holder of the trademark. At the what stage it should be said that the seller is holder of the trademark. Suppose the seller has filed the application for the registration of a trademark and he is not having a registered trademark. In short, what the tribunal held is that the holder of the trademark is holder of a registered trademark. And therefore, whenever there is a context of holder of a seller selling the goods under the holding a trademark, it should always mean that he is the holder of the registered trademark. Next. However, as always in the laws, there are exceptions. As I have already told that this is the first stage single point tax. Yes, to the large extent, it is the first point single stage tax. However, in respect of certain goods, there is a last point of tax. And what are those goods? Those goods are foreign liquor or the goods sold in the foreign liquor, coal, gas, natural gas, or the liquor. On these goods, there is a last point of tax. Is every goods which is having the last point of every goods, if they are attracting the last point of tax? No. For that, there are certain conditions. What are those? The goods must be sold in Maharashtra. If the liquor, I am selling liquor interstate, suppose, or I am selling coal interstate, then it is, I cannot levy tax at the last point tax. Then there are services relating to the supply of food. There cannot be a last point of tax. This actually, a last point of tax means what? Suppose goods are sold at the manufacturer at 100 rupees and last point they are sold at the 200 rupees. Then at all the subsequent stages of prior to the last stage, the tax is not levied. Those are exempted, and tax is levied only on the last point. This may be because there would be a larger value addition at the last point of tax, the last point of sale. Therefore, the tax is levied on the last point of sale. Next. The law gets complicated when you levy the tax on the purchases. Because the entry 54 at that point of time, unamended entry 54 at that point of time, empowered the state government to levy the tax on the sales of the goods as well as the purchases of the goods. There seems to be a tendency to avoid the taxes by purchasing the goods from the unregistered dealer who is not in the value of chain of the taxation. Therefore, the state legislature thought it fit to bring the certain goods where the purchase tax can be levied. And what are those stages? The purchase of the goods from the unregistered dealer. As such, the goods are purchased from the unregistered dealer and they are not sold. Means the goods are held in the stock, and that point of time, the purchase tax is levied. The second contingency where the purchase tax could be levied, the goods are sold from the unregistered dealer, but they are transferred to the branches by way of other than sales. They are not, the sales is not effected. Therefore, there is no chance of getting tax to the government. Therefore, that contingency is brought under the law that if any registered taxpayer who purchases the goods from the unregistered dealer and those goods are transferred to the branches, then under that contingency, the purchase tax would be levied. The goods are manufactured. The purchases are from the unregistered dealer. The goods are used in the manufacturing, but they are not sold. They remain in the stock. Then the purchases of the taxes on the specified goods. Powers were taken by the government to specify on what goods the taxes would be levied on the even if they are purchased from the registered dealers. And the next contingency where the purchase tax is levied when there is a death of proprietor, the purchase tax would be levied on the goods which are held in the stock, although they are purchased from the registered dealer, because there is no chances of getting the taxes on the disposal of that business assets or the goods. Then the next stage is transfer of disposal of the business. If there is a transfer from A to B, a private limited company has acquired a business of another private limited company, or the business is disposed of, then in that contingency also purchase tax was levied, or a firm of partnership is dissolved, or the company is for whatever reason is extinguished, then in that contingency the taxes were levied as a purchase tax. And next contingency is discontinuance of the business. If any reason the business is discontinued and the taxpayer was holding a particular stock, in all these contingencies, the purchase tax is to be levied on the goods which were held in the stock, irrespective of whether they are purchased from the registered dealer or the unregistered dealer. Earlier contingency is what? The purchases are made which are from the unregistered dealer. In the earlier chain of transaction, there is no taxes paid by the seller who is unregistered. Other contingencies are where the business is disposed of, means he is holding the goods in the stock irrespective whether the goods are purchased from the unregistered dealer or they are purchased from the registered dealer. Now, as usual, the need of more revenue forces the government to look at the different areas where the taxes can be levied and the revenue can be increased. This leads to a situation where there is a power is taken to levy the surcharge as well as the turnover tax, or what we call it as an additional tax. This turnover tax or the surcharge was linked to the how much taxes I am paying. Suppose my gross liability of to pay tax is 100 rupees without adjustment of the set-off, then on this 100 rupees, the surcharge will be levied. And the next facet of the tax is that the additional tax or the turnover tax, which is linked to the what turnover of sales I am effecting. If suppose the sales effected by me, turnover of it is more than the X amount, that is that point of time it was more than 10 lakh, then on such turnover which is exceeding 10 lakh rupees, I was liable to pay the turnover tax, or what we call it, was calling it as a additional tax. This actually may lead to a more revenue, but it has its own cascading effect, because although the turnover tax and the surcharge were allowed to be collected after some point of time, still it is having the cascading effect, because it has to be levied only on the first point. And what it increases the effective tax rate. Therefore, these all things led to a introduction of 2005 Value Added Tax Act. See it in the next PPT. Next. What are the disputes that are revolved around under the BST Act? The dispute were more concerning about whether particular activity is manufacturing or not, because the taxes were levied only on the sales which are coming out of the manufactured goods. If there is a manufacturing and the sales had happened, then only taxes were levied. Then the manufacturing, to define manufacturing, there were different facets employed at that point of time, whether it changes its original form, whether it has its new marketable marketability. These were the disputes at that point of time, and the dispute was also concerning to grant of the eligibility certificate to a package scheme under the package scheme of incentive. A particular unit, if is not having is not engaged into the manufacturing, it was not getting the entitlement certificate or eligibility certificate. Therefore, the core of the disputes were concerning to manufacturing. As the consonance of it, the next category was whether to allow the resale or not. Whether it's not a manufacturing activity, then it must be a resale. But suppose if certain goods are purchased and after making little activities on those, it changes its form, then in such contingencies, the resale were not allowed. As I told that under the package scheme of incentives, the most pertinent issue concerning the revenue while grant of eligibility certificate or the entitlement certificate was whether that particular activity is a manufacturing activity or not. The another issues which we can say are not of much importance nowadays, were having great importance in those point of time, whether the notice for the assessment is issued, whether it has the name and style of the business in a particular manner. If suppose it is a proprietary concern and I am writing the name of the proprietor, what would happen to it, whether that notice would be defective, and based upon that defective notice where the assessee or representative of assessee has not taken objection at the time of the issuance of the notice, at the time of the first appearance to the proceeding, but subsequently at some point of time, say at the tribunal level, he objects to the issuance of the notice. And the law at that point of time was, if the notice is issued defective, then whole proceeding stands void. Therefore, these aspects were very important to decide whether the notice was issued as a proper notice or not. Next issues which were concerning to the most of the litigation where the deferral or the exemption unit, the very famous that PV Textile judgment, which defines whether the dealer will get the benefits proportionate to the addition in the capital investment or the additional production, and the everlasting issue which concerns the litigation is the rate of tax. It was there in the previous era, it was in the VAT era, and it will remain to be there in the GST or whatever law is there which has the taxation linked to a rate of tax. These are the few broad areas where the disputes were at various levels, that is the first appellate authority, second appellate authority, or it may be the tribunal of the High Court or the Supreme Court. Next. Then, what were the proceedings or the procedural aspects that were also leading to the disputes? They are the reassessment or the revision. Then revision, whether the notice is issued within a particular time period or not. What does the, in suppose reassessment proceeding, the time period was given for the initiation of the proceeding. What does it mean? If once I have issued the notice and the proceeding can rest to the eternity and still it is a valid proceeding, because the time limit was linked to the within 8 years at that point of time, I was required to finish the reassessment proceeding. If I have initiated the reassessment proceeding within 8 years, then that 8 years was a valid time period. I can wait for another n number of years and pass the reassessment order. The reassessment order, as I told, if the proceeding is initiated, but what was the material available for the initiation of the proceeding? Whether that material is dehoused the record, whether there is a change in opinion. If there is a change in opinion, the law was not allowing to reassess the case, because whatever material was there, the mind was applied and particular conclusion was reached. Then, and although I have reached to a particular conclusion, but I am reassessing the dealer because there is a change in opinion. Such type of things were held to be not allowed if the material is already on the record, mind is applied, opinion is formed, and subsequently there is a change in opinion, then the reassessment proceeding was not allowed to be undertaken. Then what was the remedy available? There must be a remedy. Therefore, the provisions of revision was there. Now, revision, whether there is a change in opinion, whether the record, the material is available, dehoused the record, or some authority has communicated that there is defect in the assessment order, then the revision was made. There were certain levels of the revision. Who should make the revision? Reassessment, any authority who has passed the order can reassess that particular taxpayer or dealer. But revision, the orders which were passed, I will speak in the so far as designations are concerned in the today's context. If the orders are passed by the sales tax officer or state tax officer and the assistant commissioner, then the revision has to be made by the authorities above these two authorities, that is the either deputy commissioner, joint commissioner, additional commissioner. And if the deputy commissioner passes the order, then the revision has to be made by the authorities who are at the higher in the chain of decision making, that is the joint commissioner, additional commissioner, or the commissioner. And likewise, if the order is passed by the joint commissioner, then the additional commissioner is the revisional authority. In all these cases, what is the particular facet? That notice has to be issued within the certain stipulated time period for initiation of the proceeding, either be it the revision or be it the reassessment, reassessment. All these issues, whether there is a change in opinion, whether the revision proceeding is issued within the stipulated time period, whether the revision was of the appeal order, and the appeal, that is the first appeal order, first appellate order passed by the first appellate authority, and the revision is being made by, suppose Joint Commissioner has passed the order and Additional Commissioner is making the revision. In that context, always the dispute was concerning whether that matter was contested before the appellate authority or not. If suppose X issue is involved before the assessing authority and dealer has filed the appeal on the issue which is Y, and now that the order of the that revision appeal is made only in respect of the Y issue. Whether the Additional Commissioner who is with the revisional authority is having the authority to revise the order on the X issue which was not before the appellate authority. That is the theory of the merger of the order. In such situation, the revisional power of the, I am of the view that the revisional power of the Additional Commissioner under those laws were very limited. It applies to the tribunal also. Therefore, as I already told, that the issues relating to the dispute were validity of the notice, defect in notice, period of limitation, issuance of the notice, following the natural process of natural justice or not. These were the issues before the under the BST era. What was the power which the dealer or what was the authorities which were the appellate authority at that point of time under the BST law? Those were the, I will again talk in the today's context, that is the Deputy Commissioner or the Joint Commissioner, where the order is passed by the Assistant Commissioner or the State Tax Officer. The appellate authorities were the Deputy Commissioner or the Joint Commissioner. That is the first appellate authority. But if suppose this appeal, pardon me, in that law, the choice was given to the Deputy Commissioner, the dealer, to prefer the appeal if the, say, the order is passed by the Assistant Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner, then the first appeal was lying with the Joint Commissioner. If the order, Assistant Commissioner and State Tax Officer, the order was with the first appeal was with the Deputy Commissioner. And if the Deputy Commissioner passes the original order, then the dealer was having the choice either to file the appeal to the Joint Commissioner or to the tribunal. Since the Deputy Commissioner passing the order, the law was giving opportunity to the dealer to prefer an appeal either before the tribunal directly or before the Joint Commissioner. And the similar was the situation if suppose the first appellate authority passes the order, then the appellant was having the choice to go to the departmental appellate authority or directly to the tribunal. That has not been in the VAT. That the tribunal the dealer is vested the power to appeal to the tribunal only against the orders which are passed by the appellate authority. In short, whenever the Deputy Commissioner passes the original order, the dealer was having the choice to go to the Joint Commissioner or the tribunal. And in respect of the appeal, whether the appeal order is passed by the Joint Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner, the dealer was having the choice to go to the tribunal or whoever is the first appellate authority. If he passes the order, he was having the choice to go to the departmental appellate authority or the tribunal. As I told that the dispute were concerning to the rate of tax, therefore the rate of tax as always under any taxation law are divided under certain schedules. The schedule A was pertaining to the goods which are having nil rate of tax, that is exempted. B schedule was the declared goods, and there was the definition of the declared goods in the section 15 of the CST Act. It prescribed the list of the goods which are to be said to be declared goods. Then there was schedule C part 1, which was prescribing the tax in most point of the time was the 4%, and it is the raw material which is mostly used in the manufacturing. And then the Schedule C Part 2, and generally it prescribes the multiple rates of the taxes starting from the 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 16, 19, 20, or even more than that. And there were the list of the goods against which the specified tax rate of tax or percentage of tax is prescribed. And there was another another schedule schedule entry which was consisting of the more number of entries into one sub entries into one single entry, and based upon these entries, whether the particular product falls under a particular entry or not, that was the most of the time the disputed areas. Next, in this Bombay Sales Tax Act would be the provisions relating to the set-off and calculation thereof. As the tax levied was a first point single stage tax, therefore it was very essential to define who will get the set-off, because the point of taxation is only the point where the tax is levied, that is either is the manufacturing or the importer, as I told earlier. Therefore, which dealer is entitled for the payment of tax set-off, claim of set-off, was relating to whether he is a manufacturer, whether he is the seller of a particular goods, whether he is whether there is a levy of the purchase tax. Depending upon that, various classifications of entitlement of set-off was made. Just like, say, if a dealer is a manufacturer of goods, then he was entitled for the set-off under Rule 41D of the Bombay Sales Tax Rule. If suppose dealer is making the interstate sales, then he was entitled for the set-off under 43C. I do not think there, because of the paucity of the time, there is more I can discuss about the Bombay Sales Tax Act. I think the next slide is relating to the procedural aspect involved in the Bombay Sales Tax Act. As we all know, the 2005 and prior era was not that much digitalization had happened. Therefore, right from the filing of the return till the assessment and payment, there was little digital intervention was involved. Every process, that is right from the filing of the return till the issuance of the order, these were all manual. The dealer used to make the payment in the bank physically, either through the check or any instrument, and then was handing over or submitting his returns to a designated desk, which were then consolidating the return and submitting to the respective jurisdictional officer. Those were the days where everything happened physically. Any application, any return, any payment challan has to be only through a physical mechanism. As I already told, the taxes were collected and levied at the first stage and single point, and few exceptions with the last point of tax. The registration of the dealer was the dealer was required to get the registration. The last the threshold was rupees 10 lakh, and there were various documents which were required to be issued by the authorities under the GST Act. Those were the license, authorization, recognition, and permits. Because of the certain documents, if you hold a particular document, then he was entitled for the purchases on a concessional rate. And this era finished on the 31st March 2005, and the new era of the Value Added Tax Act started. Next slide. Next slide. The Maharashtra Value Added Tax Act, although the bill was passed in 2002, which was sent for the assent of the Honorable President, and taking on board various states, although the bill was passed in 2002, but Act was notified on the 1st April 2005. Therefore, we will see the MVAT Act 2002, but it is effective from 2005. This Maharashtra value-added tax, or for that matter, value-added taxation system, is a result of the prolonged negotiation between the empowered committee, which was the members were the finance minister of the state, and after negotiation deciding the floor rates and common procedures, the finally majority of the state, barring few states, introduced the value-added tax act in year 2005, and the source of legislation remains to be the article of the entry 54 of the state list. The name itself suggests that it is a value-added tax act. Wherever there is a value addition, whether it is a zero or to the large extent, or to any extent, there will be levied a value added. Therefore, this incidence of tax is multi-point, multi-stage. It doesn't classify the dealers, whether he is a manufacturer, he is an importer, he is a wholesaler, he is a retailer, nothing like. Every stage, wherever there is a sales, there would be a levied tax, and the taxpayer would be, or the dealer would be entitled for the offsetting his tax liability, a set off of the taxes which he has paid on the earlier stages, and the taxes payable minus the set off which he is entitled would be the final output tax which he is liable to pay. This is all we know. This was progressive tax, little progressive than the GST, and it was covering a large extent of the value addition. I am saying the large extent because it was not covering every aspect, every level of the value addition. The retailer stage, wherever the turnover is below that threshold of 10 lakhs, he was not covered under the value addition. Whatever value addition is made at the last point of sale, that is 10, 15% or 5%. That was, except that every value addition was covered under the value added tax. As I told, under the BST, there was the exception to the single point. Here also there is exception to the multi-point. The multi-point tax or the value addition tax is not applicable in respect of the motor spirit or the diesel or the petrol, or where the sales is made is of the liquor or the wine. Under in both the contingencies, the tax is levied at the first point, that is the oil marketing company's level, the tax is levied, and in the subsequent chain of sales, the tax is exempted. Similar is the situation in case of liquor or the wine, where the taxes are levied only in respect of the manufacturing stage, and the manufacturer is given the option to pay the taxes at the scheduled rate. Say scheduled rate is 60%, or on the maximum retail price, which is the price at which he sells at the last point. In both the cases, the taxes are levied under the last point, even if it is the import of the goods, and importer is given the choice to prefer the taxes on the maximum retail price or the pay taxes at the scheduled rate. But I can say 99.99, I have not seen a dealer who is not paying the taxes on the MRP. Therefore, except these two situations, the taxes are, we can say it is a value-added tax. This value-added tax act, so as to minimize the burden, also provides the composition scheme, called as a composition scheme for the retailer, restaurant, bakery, seller of the bakery products, or the seller of the second-hand motor vehicle, or for that matter, the hotels or the restaurants who are having the turnover below certain threshold. These are the composition scheme is available to them. Although practically there is no purchase tax levied under the MVAT Act, but the provisions were made to levy the purchase tax in respect of the sale of the oil seeds or the cotton. This provision has never been notified. The registration threshold under the VAT Act was rupees 20 lakh. Whoever is having the turnover above exceeding 20 lakh, he was required to obtain the registration. And in initial era, the registration was manual, but from 2009 onwards, everything under the VAT, almost we can say, it was under the electronic means. Right from the filing of the registration application, return, making payment, passing assessment order, filing appeal, to large extent is electronically driven. There was another facet, getting the work done. I can say it is outsourced work, that if a dealer is having a particular threshold, then his books of account were made to be audited. That was not under the BST Act, but under the Value Added Tax Act, if the dealer is having the threshold of turnover of sales or purchases more than 1 crore, then the chartered accountant was required to audit the books of account and make a audit report in form 704, what is the prescribed form, and submit to the department. And the dealer was asked to whatever recommendations are made by the, or the discrepancies are pointed out by the auditor, the dealer was asked to accept or not to accept. If he, particularly tax liability, he was given the choice to accept the tax or the recommendations made by the auditor, or he may not accept it. But if he accepts it, then he has to pay it immediately. The Value Added Tax Act was more of a nature of the self-compliance, and there was a minimum intervention from the departmental side, and only the few cases based upon certain parameters from the almost we can say from the initial days, barring few exceptions, the assessments were done on the only on the basis of certain parameters. And what we aim in the GST was perhaps practically implemented under the MVAT Act, that is the floor rate of tax, that is the 0.6 and 13.5. At the last time, the taxes were 6% and 13.5%, and except the gold bullion and precious stones, the tax was 1.25%. I could say that the concerning the business, almost 90% of the business, the taxes were only three rates, that is 0.6 and 13.5%. Therefore, that was more progressive tax, more or less complicated in the sense of understanding the law, which perhaps we wanted to achieve in the GST. And the frequency of the filing returns was only the monthly return, and the that is 6 monthly return was required to be filed if the tax payment is beyond certain limit. That is, if it is more than 10 lakh or 10 lakh or more, or refund is 1 crore or more, then the such type of taxpayer was required to file the monthly return. All other taxpayers were required to file. Sorry, it is not bi-monthly; it is quarterly return. It is not means 6 monthly. It is now quarterly return. Next, as usual, any taxation law, the dispute will revolve around the rate of tax. But all other disputes which were in the GST, that perhaps are in the BST, that are not there in the VAT. But the most predominant disputes under the VAT Act are the rate of tax, admissibility of the set-off, and proportionate benefits under the package scheme of incentives, or the different rulings given by the advanced ruling authority, or the determination done by the commissioner. I would say the most disputed area among the pending at various levels is the grant of set-off, because the law insists that the taxpayer must have made the payment into the government treasury, and if he has not made the payment into the government treasury, then that set-off is disallowed because of the Mahalakshmi judgment and other rulings of the tribunal. Therefore, the major area concerning would be the two in the number sense, that is the volume sense, is the rate of tax and admissibility of the set-off. and little extent the advanced ruling given by the different advanced ruling authorities. These perhaps the legislature has made a very noble or very new provisions which I didn't find in many of the taxation law of the value-added taxation law, that considering the admissibility of set of issue, that anybody is taking the registration for only for the sake of issuance of the bills, and thereby the set off is taken fraudulently. For that, the law provided at that point of time that if sorry, that aspect is dealt in the next slide. The law taken into the consideration the experiences which is gained during the BST era, that the even defective notice issued was challenged and the order was treated as a null and void, I mean issued. Those aspects are taken care into the VAT, and it says that even if the notice is issued defective, but it is as per the intent and the purposes of the law, then it would not be treated as a defective. Even if certain order is passed under, say, or certain order is required to be passed under section, say 23 subsection 2, and officer has wrongly referred some other section, still that order is as per the intent and purposes of the law. Therefore, it cannot be treated as a void or the bad order. For that purpose, the condition was that the taxpayer or the dealer or his representative must have acted upon that that notice. Suppose a defective notice is issued or the section quoted is wrong, and the taxpayer has acted upon that notice, then he cannot take the plea that your notice was defective, therefore this order should have been null and void. He cannot take certain excuses. If there are mistakes in the notices, if there are mistakes in the order, or there is the defects in the order, but they are so far as that they are in harmony with the intent and the purposes of the law, and those proceedings have been acted upon by the or attended by the taxpayer, then those are not to be treated as a void. Gaining from the experience of the BST Act, there is no provision for the reassessment, but the scope of the revision is widened to say that the order which is prejudicial to the nature of the revenue or erroneous, this would suffice to initiate the proceeding of the review. However, the situation which were existing in the BST Act, that the merger theory of the order, whether the issue before the appellate authority is different and the assessing authority is different, then whether the revisional authority or the review authority has got the power to review the issue which is dealt by the assessing authority and not by the appellate authority, still remains there. As I referred during the BST law, that now the first appellate authority are the deputy commissioner and the joint commissioner. In case deputy commissioner, state tax officer, and the assistant commissioner, and for the joint commissioner, the officer below is the deputy commissioner. Second appeal has to be to the tribunal only, and there is no provision for the second appeal to the departmental authority. The various provisions under the MSI relating to the returns. The return is required, as I told, return is required to be filed electronically. The frequency of the return is monthly or the quarterly, depending upon what is the amount of tax he is required to pay. The method of payment is compulsorily electronic payment, no manual payment is allowed. Assessment is taken only on the basis of the certain predefined parameters, and the powers have been taken by the government to notify the parameters which are on the basis of which the assessment could be selected. The parameters are mostly what we call it as a CDA parameter, that is the difference between my set of claim and the set of passed on by the my supplier. Then the rate of tax issues pertaining to those parameters are there. Then the advance authorities, ruling authorities, whatever the advance ruling they have given, that has to be taken into consideration while selecting the case for the assessment. And mostly the assessments are on the basis of the selection made by the commissioner. The process remains almost same what was in the BSK era, that the issuance of the notice, giving the natural opportunity of hearing, examining the documents, forming the opinion on the basis of which the taxes are to be additionally imposed, set up to be denied, etc. There are different subsections in the assessment section. Whether I want to make the comprehensive assessment, whether I want to make the assessment based upon the certain transactions, or whether the assessment is to be made of a dealer who has not obtained the registration, or whether the assessment is to be made whether the dealer is not attending the proceeding, or whether he has filed the returns late. These are the classification based upon which the assessments are made. The procedure involved in the assessment is more or less same everywhere. One has to give the issue the notice, call for the hearing, examine the documents, and pass the order. And in these the issues based upon which the additional taxes are demanded or the set off is denied. Then the unlike of the BST Act, there is the provision of the tax deduction at source. If it is in relation to the work contract activities, whether a principal contractor or the employer who has awarded the contract is awarding the contract to a contractor, then whatever payment he is making to the contractor, he is required to make the certain deduction. That is 2% in case that the contractor is registered, and if he is not registered, it is 4%. Then this whatever taxes my employer has deducted, I am allowed to take the credit of it and offset my liability, whatever taxes are paid, provided that he has issued the certificate prescribed in prescribed form about the deduction of the tax and payment of it. Then the provision was also made, that is the tax collection at source. This tax collection at source, the provision is relating to the, if any authority, either the central government or the state government, is awarding any contract for the excavation of the minor minerals, or any award is being, or the contract is being given by the say district collector awards the contract for excavation of the sand. In such situation, what was happening, that the contractor who is having taken the contract for excavation of the sand, he was running away, and government was not receiving any money when he subsequently sells the sand. The provision was made to make a tax collection at source, say 10% of the contract awarded, or the royalty rights which has been given. It was for royalty payment. Whatever royalty payment he was required to make to the central government or the state government, on that tax collection was done. The provisions for the refund, whenever there is excess payment of the taxes made by the dealer, the provision was made to refund the taxes. And unlike in the VAT, there was no outer time limit, or there was not even an application by dealer for seeking the refund. The refund was given based upon the assessment, because the assessment was compulsory. 100% assessments were done in the BST era, whereas in the VAT era, the assessments are by exception and by selection of the based upon selection criteria. Therefore, every dealer was required to make an application for seeking the refund, and that application has to be made within the stipulated period, that is the 18 months from the date of the end of the period to which the refund application relates. Therefore, the dispute arises, or there are disputes if a particular taxpayer has not filed the refund application within a stipulated time of period, that is 18 months. Then what is the treatment to be given to that refund application? Most authorities in the beginning has rejected the refund application, and one of the case reached to the High Court recently, that is Eland's case, where the tribunal, where the High Court has held that was the writ jurisdiction, where the High Court has held that if the application has not been made within a stipulated time period, based upon that facts of that case, it was held that the dealer is not entitled for the refund. There was earlier judgment of Vichare and Sons, which was taken care of the department, and department was giving the refund, even if in certain after certain period of time, say after 15 or so, 2015 or so, even if dealer has claimed the refund in the return or in the 704, the refund was allowed to be granted. But because of the e-lands, it may perhaps give the different dimensions to the thinking of the department. As well, last slide I was discussing, the in view of the taxpayers who are engaged or dealers who are engaged in the issuance of the fake bills or the bills without sale of goods, they were the provisions was made in that point of time, 2005, to look at the intention of the taxpayer who are getting into the agreement of sale and purchase, and if the agreement is to defraud the revenue, then such agreement, that is the transaction relating to sale or purchase, is held to be a transaction which is void. Even if this, with the additional benefit of this section 57, one could go into the nature of the agreements which I have made with the buyer, the supplier-buyer relation, and I can find out if there is the intention to defraud the revenue. I can read the intention from their behavior or the document, then that would be treated as a void. The provision was made for the audit of the accounts by both the authorities, by the sales tax authorities, that is the departmental authorities, as well as the auditor, which the part of auditor which I have explained. The officers were supposed to go to the field, which was not in the BST, and verify the books of account of the dealer. Next. Already time is over so far as the VAT Act is concerned. I have just say there are 50 slides, and remaining there are 30 slides almost, and out of that 30 slides, 28 slides or odd are relating to the VAT. These are mostly not as such to the provisions of the law, but they are relating to the most disputed arena of the under the VAT Act, that is the Work Contract Act. If your honor permits me to continue for another say 10-15 minutes, I would continue. Or then this MVAT Act relating to the work contract, there are various provisions of the MVAT Act are used in the determining whether a particular activity is a work contract activity or not, and it starts from the definition of sales. It involves if this is the work contract activity and the TDS is made by the employer, then whether to give the credit of it, at what level it should be given. If the contract is awarded, say, to the principal contractor, and principal contractor again recontract it to the subcontractor, or down the line, whether the TDS made is to be passed on to what extent it should be passed on. Then the composition scheme, because this is work contract determining the taxable turnover, which or the value of the goods involved in the execution of the work contract, being the deemed sales, is very tedious and complicated provision. Therefore, the legislature has provided the composition scheme. Two types of composition scheme are there. Then it also, since there is the involvement of the principal and the agent, therefore it provides for the would be the agent and what would be responsibility of the agent and who would be the principal. Then what should happen to the contract which were continued after the appointed date, that is the 1st April 2005, and which are still going on. Then what treatment should be given to them, that is also taken care. Then the set of rules regarding particularly to the work contract, they have been taken care in this discussion. And then how do I find out the value of the goods that is used in the execution of the work contract, which is the crux of the matter? Then that is taken care by the rule 58, 58(1)(a) and 58(1)(b). We will go one by one. Next. As the history of the work contract starts from the decision given by the Supreme Court in the Gannon-Dunkerley, which lead to say that the earlier what would happen, the work contract activity, even if it is a individual, the state were not having the power to levy the taxes. For that, it reached to because of that there was losses to the state exchequer, which lead to a amendment 48 amendment, which we all know. Next. This 48th amendment provided for the certain cells said to be a dim cell, defined to be a dim cell, which consists of various cells among them, and the famous of which the supply of the food for the human consumption and the works contract. I will only speak about these two. Then this 48th amendment, under previous to 2005, there was a separate Works Contract Act which we are looking, or which was considering the levy of the tax on the works contract. But since that 2005 or that 1989 rather Act has been repealed, therefore to take care of the situation of the works contract, the definition of the sales was expanded, and to include these type of activities, the definition was expanded to include, to say that like, any agreement which involves the construction, manufacturing, processing, fabrication, erection, installation, fitting out, improvement, modification, repair, or commissioning of any, these all terminologies are related to the immovable property. This consideration has to be towards the building construction, fabrication, erection, installation, fitting out, improvement, or the modification or the repair, which is relating to the immovable property. That is what it is called as the works contract. That is any agreement which is entered which aims at construction of or the transfer of goods in any form while executing a works contract. That is what the works contract is defined as. And since 2006 onwards, this definition introduced, and every dealer who is engaged in the activity of transferring the goods during the execution of the works contract was entitled or was liable to pay tax. Then the sales simpliciter and the works contract. The sales involve the buyer and seller. There is the cost of goods. Usually, the goods are sale of. There is a sale as a chattel to chattel sale, and the sale takes place in consideration of a price, and there is always a sale of goods. Whereas in relation to the works contract, there is a relationship between the principal and employer, contractor, subcontractor. Cost of the material and labor are the prime importance for the levy of the tax. Then the labor component always exists in the works contract, and that has to be given deduction by employing certain standard rules. And the sale per se, that is the transfer of the property per se, doesn't take place as a chattel to chattel. It is and the employer is giving a contract for the construction of a particular thing where the goods are involved in during the execution of the that works contract, and the price of the goods has to be determined by employing the rule given in the rule 58, and the value of the goods which actually involved in the execution of the works contract, which is only liable for the tax. The basic principle for levy of the works contract, as I told, there must be as it relates to the erection of the immovable property. Therefore, there must be a transfer of property. Transfer of property should take place during the course of execution of works contract only. The composite contract, it should be a composite contract which cannot be divided into the labor and the cost of goods portion. The transfer of goods may take place because of the accretion, that is by embedding movable goods into the immovable goods. Example is the construction activity. It has to be followed by the method of accession, that is attaching movable property into the immovable, that is the painting, etc., or the fixing spare parts, etc. the theory of blending, that is the dyeing and printing, etc. These are the principles which are required to be followed while whether determining whether a particular activity is a work contract or not. Next. Then I have already told that there is a provision for the TDS. Next. Then there are two composition methods given in the law. Giving the first is gives the rate of 5% and 8%. 5% is where it involves the construction of building, railways, tunnels, roads, etc. And all other activities which are not like the construction of building, road, tunnel, dam, etc. They attract the 8% tax. And there is a provision for composition scheme in respect of the sale of the flat dwelling, commercial complexes, which attract the 1% tax. And this 1% was linked till 30th April 2017. It was linked to the payment of the stamp duty value fixed for the payment of the stamp duty. That is the market value fixed referred in the agreement entered for the purchase of those properties. It was the 1%, and subsequent to the 1st May 2017, it was linked to the payment which I have received. First is the 1% is whether or not I have received the payment. If I have received the 10,000 rupees payment towards the booking of a flat and the agreement value is 1 crore, I have to pay 1 crore on 1% on the 1 crore, not on the 10,000. After 1st May, this scheme was linked, delinked from the agreement to the what payment I have received. Means I have received the 10,000 rupees payment and I have registered the agreement. Still, the I would be required to make the 1% payment on the 10,000. That is the amount which I have received. This scheme was introduced from the 1st April 2010, and it has reduced most of the litigation relating to the works contract. Next. Then the quantum of the deduction which is required to be taken into the consideration while I am making the payment, that is the advance payment which I have made or the TDS which my employer has made. This is the composite contract relating to the maintenance and service, repairs, improvements, or the construction of work like building, road, dam, jetty, etc. are the few examples of the work contract. Then there is this section talks about the principal and agent relationship and what are their liability to so far as the payment of the tax, that is the joint and several in case of contractor and the principal contractor, and whatever the principal contractor if gives the subcontract to the subcontractor, then either the principal contractor can make the payment and work can get executed by the subcontractor, or principal contractor will not pay anything, but the subcontractor will pay everything and take the set off. And whatever the margin is retained by the principal contractor, that suppose the employer has awarded the contract of 100 rupees and the principal contractor has awarded that to the intern 80 rupees, then on 20 rupees margin, he is required to make the payment. And whatever method of payment is followed by the subcontractor in respect of the payment and claim of set off is required to be followed by the principal contractor. The determination of the sale price, there are two methods, that is the actual expense method and the fixed percentage method. Actual expenses method, if suppose the contract is awarded for the 100 rupees and whatever expenses I have made, and I have recorded those expenses in the books of account under the various heads. What are those heads? We will see in the next slide. Those heads I was entitled to reduce from my contract value the expenses which I am making, and on the value of the goods. Thereby, I am determining the value of the goods involved in the execution of the work contract, and on that value, I am liable to pay the taxes. The second method, I am not able to fix my expenses per contract. Therefore, the law has provided, or Rule 58 has provided, a prescribed table method depending upon the nature of contract I am engaging into. If I am engaging into, say, contract of construction of dam, or I am engaging into the contract of painting, or I am engaging in the some other contract which is not defined, then there is a fixed percentage right from the 30% to say 40%. If it is an annual maintenance contract, then the contractor is entitled to take the deduction up to the extent of 40%, and he would be liable to 60%. If contract is say of the construction contract, he would be liable to the take deduction of 30%, and 70% would be value liable for tax. And as I already told, there is a composition method on contract value. Suppose 100 is the contract value, and I am a construction contractor, I can pay 5% straightway on the contract value. And I am other than the construction contractor, then I can straightway pay 8%. And if I am a seller or the constructor is a dealer dealing in the sale of flat dwelling commercial complexes, then I can straight pay 1% on the agreement value, that is the market value. Next. Then what are the deductions which are provided by the law are given in the rule 58, which are the labor and service charges for the execution of the work, amount paid. This I can, as I told, I can subcontract the contract which is given by the employer. Therefore, I am entitled to deduct as a principal contractor. Suppose 100 rupees contract is given, and that whole 100 rupees is subcontracted. Then I will be able to deduct that 100 rupees from my turnover, which would be taxable at the hands of the subcontractor. Next. These are the various costs which is relatable to my execution of the work contract, which is provided as a deduction in the law. Next. As I told, there is the various deductions are given, which ranges from the 50% to 15% to 40%, and that is depending upon the nature of contract or the activities which I undertook. Next. This again explains the what type of composition I am desirous of opting for the payment of my tax. Next. The construction contract, as I use the word very frequently, the term construction contract, they are defined under the law, and the list of which is say it is the building of roads, runways, bridges, railways, dams, tunnels, canals, etc. And if I am engaged into the construction of these contracts or execution of this contract, then I can opt for the 5%, which is the only relevance is what is the rate of tax which should attract to those activities, whether 80% or the 5%. If I am undertaking these activities, then the rate of tax is 5%. In all other cases, it is 8%. And law also provides that if any contract is incidental or the ancillary to the contract which I am engaged into, suppose I am engaged into the contract of construction of the building, and electrification is the contract which is incidental to the construction. Therefore, that electrification will also, I have given the contract, say 100 rupees for a construction of building and 20 rupees for the electrification, then 20% of the electrification amount will also attract the 5% tax, because it has commenced at, and the condition is that such contract must be executed before the completion of the contract which is I am engaged into. A building is being constructed and I am undertaking the electrification at the say at or about the time of completion, then the 5% rate would be there. In all other cases, it would be 8%. Section 91G, it simply refers that the contracts which are continued after the 1st April 2005, that is the appointed day, previous slide. Right, sir. That may not be covered. Even as given the example of electrification. Now say the whole wiring earlier is it is not of use, and I am again engaging some other contractor to get the electrification done, then that will not covered, because it is awarded and executed before the completion of the said contract. If this situation fits into, then only it will be 5%. In any other case, suppose the painting contract is given after 5 years of the occupation certificate issue, it will not get involved into fit into it. Next. Then I was talking about, if any contract is continued after the appointed day, then the state, what is the concern of a contractor who is continuing the contract after the appointed day, that rate of taxes are changed, set of rules are changed, then what would be my tax liability? The law says that his tax liability will be protected. Whatever was the rate of tax in respect of that contract, that would remain, provided that he is not claiming any set-off. Suppose it is because under previous law there was no provisions of set-off. Therefore, if the rate of tax in respect of a particular contract, say road contract, now it is 5%, earlier was 3%. Say the contracts which were awarded by the state government were exempted, and now it is taxable. Then the rate of tax, whatever was prevailing at that point of time in respect of those contracts, will prevail today, provided he is not claiming any set-off. This is the only 96(1)(g)(6) about. Then this is the set-off rules, which says that if a taxpayer is engaged into works contract, how his set-off should be calculated. As I am paying the taxes at the lesser rate, that is 5% and 8%, whether am I supposed to get the full set-off? Law rule say will not get the full set-off. That will be 64% he will be entitled in case the rate of tax is 8%, and in case the rate of tax is 5%, then the reduction would be made 4% of the purchase price. And in case of 1%, there is no set-off available. He has to pay 1% on the market value of the contract which is engaged into. And in case of ongoing contract, as I told right now, that is the no set-off is allowed in respect of the RD purchase. Next. 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 This is next. Next. These are the forms which are required to be given when I am not making the payment and subcontractor is making the payment, or the principal is making the payment, although contract is executed by the subcontractor. Next. Next. This work contract activity for the 2006 to 2010, it was 1% was not applicable. He has to either pay 5% or 8%. From 1st April 2010, he was given option to pay 1%. Six. 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 I have already discussed this. Next. The overview of profession tax, this is only one slide. The source of the entry is entry 60 of the Constitution, and limit given in the Article 276 is 2,500. We all know what is the rate of tax for the profession undertaken by the salaried person. The maximum is 2,500, which can be divided into the 12 months. That is, at present it is 175 for 10 months and 200 for 10 months and 300 for 2 months. And female having the limit below 10,000 salary, it is exempted. And any self-employed people, there is a list of the schedule entries given in the law, which is say artist, musician, director of a company, etc. The maximum could be levied is 2,500 because of the constitutional limit. The Maharashtra law has made the provisions to collect the tax. Say LIC agents are there, and that agent carrying on some professions, they are required to make the TDS deduction on the commission which they receive from their agent. This is the new facet added to the Profession Tax Act, And next topic was given to me, the Sugarcane Purchase Tax Act. Next. The Sugarcane Purchase Tax Act is the source of entry is 54, unamended entry 54. Now the purchases are removed, and it was levied in respect of the purchase price of the purchase of the sugarcane by the factory or the mills. If individual buys it, this tax is not attracted. It attracts only where there is a factory, and factories or the unit who undertake the crushing of the sugar or the manufacturing of the sugarcane and manufacturing of the sugar, that is only liable to make the payment of the purchase tax. The rate of purchase sugarcane purchase tax is 3%. It involves the cost of the or the price given to the farmer, which includes the cost of the transportation as well as the harvesting cost, that is the cutting of the sugarcane. This is the major bone of contention between the department and the taxpayer, that is whether this harvesting and transportation charges form the part of the purchase price, because although law came into 1962, the amended definition, which was amended in 1995, included the cost of cutting of the sugarcane as well as the transportation of the sugarcane. Therefore, this is the bone of contention, perhaps lying at various levels, and this payment of tax which is required to be made by the factory is linked to what I am selling, what sugar I am selling. If suppose I have sold the sugar in the month of October and there is a liability to pay sugarcane purchase tax, that liability is linked to the sale of sugar. Whatever sugar I am selling, if liability is 100 rupees, that liability, and I am selling the sugar in October, then that liability has to be deducted. 100 rupees is to be paid. And the year for the purpose of sugarcane purchase tax is the 1st October to 30th September, and the provisions of the returns, assessment, etc. There are the standalone provisions for the assessment of the sugarcane purchase tax, and most of the years after say 2000, the exemption is provided for the payment of the sugarcane on various reasons. I think I have ended my presentation, although I could not cover the way I would have liked to cover. I have just rushed into the various provisions of the various laws in very brief. I would have been more happy to deal with this situation if the आयोजकांनी याच्याबद्दल if they have provided more time, maybe because of the reasons they are having, they have provided the 1 hour time for the almost 5 laws, which are 4 laws which is I have taken into consideration. The next topic which is to be dealt by the Advani sir, he will deal about the Allied Acts. The 2 Allied Acts which we call it as Allied Act, that is the Provision Tax Act and the Sugarcane Purchase Tax Act. I have dealt. Thank you very much for the coordinator to given me this opportunity to present myself before you, and thank you all of you to give me a patient hearing. You are all stalwart in your field, but you have took time to listen me. I am very thankful. Thank you very much.
धन्यवाद बोलकर सरांकडे ऑलरेडी कार्यालय